My name is Andrii. I am CEO founder of SOC Prime company. And yeah, the reason why we organize this webinar is not only to do it live, but also to share some things we know about threats targeting Zoom and home DNS and any kind of phishing related to the current COVID campaign. As many people are now working from home, and we really observed that over the last 3 weeks, how attackers really changed their operations into targeting the cloud and SaaS systems. So this is mainly a discussion and exchanging some experience we see in the field. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in chat. Also, if you'd like to keep it interactive and audio, since we have a small group of people, I guess we can all speak on audio if you'd like. Overall, the goal was here that we'd be happy to share what we learned from our clients, what we learned ourselves as a company, as a Zoom user. And also we created a Zoom hardening guide, which we'll be posting on our blog on Monday and sharing with everybody through the Google Drive after this webinar. So if there's any specific question you want me to start with, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can just go through the guide and yeah. So I guess as we go through, you have a question, please go ahead and ask them. Right? So I will do a screen share. So Vlad, Alex, let me know if you can see the screen.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, probably by now everybody is very much familiar what Zoom is, right? And I myself have been using the tool for, I think, more than 3 years. We originally were using GoToMeeting and Webex, and we saw the rise of popularity of Zoom. The reason why we started using it was that, yeah, the tool simply worked better. It could provide better audio and video quality, and installation was quite straightforward. And despite this, message being authored on April 1st, it's actually not a joke message. And this is a very good summary of Zoom, that they are aware of all the problems that happened, and they actually here list the issues, right? So if you follow the timeline, like on Twitter or just looking at the Zoom news, you see that people would randomly join Zoom meetings because they're not password protected and post different abusive content or like talk different ugly things. And that would be serving as distraction from day-to-day business operations. And reality is that it is possible to password protect Zoom, like you see on the link you have today to our webinar, but majority of the companies are not doing that and have not been doing that, mainly because, yeah, adding a password, it's kind of, yeah, making things more complicated for average user, right? So other things were discovered because so many people are now looking into this platform. Yeah, researchers and threat hunters and pet testers were also analyzing what can be done with it. And yeah, a lot of noise was made because of Zoom is sending some data to Facebook using Facebook SDK, and they have actually reconfigured that. But if you saw how quickly vulnerabilities would pop up, that was simply amazing. So first we saw people using Zoom file share feature to share malware installation files. Then we saw phishing attacks, which use kind of Zoom as a reason for the subjects, so they would send you an email, would come in supposedly from Zoom saying, oh, hey, something changed in Zoom, you need to update your password. Just generic phishing message. And later on, this actually transformed into next stage. So next stage was actually UNC pass vulnerability, which allowed you to send a link to Zoom, which would extract your NTLM hashes and send them over to external web servers. So to execute an attack, you just needed to craft a link and have a web server open, waiting for the post requests, right? Most of those issues have been patched by now, but still, if somebody kind of sends a link to the Zoom session and other people click on it, like not much Zoom can do about it, right? So the thing is that if you read Zoom's press releases, it feels like everything is out of control. In reality, we need, as a security people, we need to ask more questions saying like, is this really the software we want on all our computers these days when people are working from home? And there are some steps to be taken, right? So let's go through them. In order to address them, we created what we call a Zoom service hardening guide. As I said, for people joined earlier, we will be posting it on our website and sending it over to everybody who signed up for this webinar. So it's pretty much a step-by-step instruction what can be done to harden Zoom and what works in reality and what doesn't, right? Because in SOC Prime we work with different companies, MSSP providers, large enterprise, Fortune 100 companies, and so on. And even in our own company, which is like 53 people, it was like not an easy decision to just change all the configurations. But we did because we're still a kind of smaller company. Yeah, so first things first. So this practical guide, we relied on external research and also on our own threat research. So yeah, pretty much any sense we could dig up. And if you're having some kind of security infrastructure in place and you have a SIEM system running, right? There's multiple ways how you can detect Zoom attacks. So you can collect logs directly from Zoom API, proxy logs, and workstation logs from your EDR or antivirus or Sysmon, and so on. The thing is that not everything is possible to detect using Zoom logs. Like even if you go to Zoom website, right, Zoom US, as far as I remember, and you go to the plans and pricing, you see that they not only differentiate by number of users, but reporting is not available in the free version, right? Custom meeting ID is only available here. Single sign-on is only available in business, right? And so on. So in order to get optimal level of login, like REST API only comes here. But I think in order to have like admin dashboard, we're saying information of gathering data and managing multiple domains, right? That's also a critical feature. So it's like, if you're not using Zoom Business, you don't have all the audit options, all the hardening options, which is what we find out also once attacks were going on, right? So that was not really clear by manufacturer. If you look into the approach of hardening, then there's several levels. You can actually configure, you can harden yourself using your own account. So like if I go to Zoom again and I sign in, right, just for the memorized password, here you would see all the configurations I can do, you know, account profile and then settings, where you can actually schedule how the meeting behaves, right? So it's a lot of check marks, a lot of things to configure, right? So now let's take a look what it means in reality. By the way, I hear people joining and off. Is everybody getting in to Webex?
Yep.
Okay, good. I just wanted to check on that. Also, if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to ask in chat, because we want to keep this interactive as possible. This is, like I was saying, this is not a product discussion. This is mostly a security guidance, right? So yeah, in terms of the tiered approach, so you configure, if you want to configure everything like on your account level, if you're using any enterprise subscription, then you need to set the settings on the account level. And that's like top tier, so they will propagate down from account level to group level and to user level, right? And pretty much there's a detailed description, so I will not go through each word here, but pretty much default settings, these are recommended settings, but user can change them. Locked settings are obligatory, right? So this is something users cannot change, right? And that's a big differentiator. So in a way, I mean, if you're also looking at like how this impacted Zoom, if you look at the stocks, which were like skyrocketing, after they got tons of security issues, the market reacted and they lost like 15% of their stock value. So yeah, if you're going into the lock settings out of the box, as a solution is not really hardened, right? You need to configure the solution and you need to make sure that it's actually, yeah, all the users follow the update. Now there's another challenge about it, because the Zoom client is not always the same for every operating system. On macOS, for example, it does not update automatically. So when you go to your app store and try to update the apps, the Zoom update is not suggested. It's only updated if there's a push a message coming from Zoom. And so far as a user, it's very hard to track when it happens, right? So it is a good idea to have minimum security requirements set at the account level and then have some special group settings set at the group level. That's pretty much the effective way of doing it. The way we try to orchestrate it is that we said, okay, so not every user is the same, right? You have info security users who probably don't talk to the outside world much and speak internally a lot. And they could have different settings from salespeople who are always on the line with the customers and suppliers and whoever, and they would need different permissions. So internally, we kind of said these are the 4 key roles that we are seeing. This is no means to an end, so you can have more roles, of course, but there's a rule of thumb, like the vanguard role would be people who have maximum communication, who need to reach out to everybody. And yeah, in order to address those risks, it is best to have a proper awareness training, what can happen on the session, what they should be aware of, because it's literally like 5 to 7 things they need to track. It's not like hundreds of things they need to do. And some of the things should be mitigated on the account level. Like the guys in the real world, so like internal staff that communicate inside the company, you can harden those accounts, right? Especially because assuming that there is some kind of internal compromise and somebody gets access to a privileged account, you don't want collateral damage to happen and other people, you know, getting infected or leaking their passwords or whatever, right? Then there are rooms. So rooms became popular, especially now that everybody's working from home. You want people to talk to each other, not always about work. So you may have a room that is open for everyone to join. Or another use case could be like in a school, right? When somebody is joining a room. So there should be still specific restrictions if you want to avoid kind of Zoom bombings and sharing all the malicious stuff over them. And then there could be a special requirements on top of that. So there could be minimum restrictions for the rooms that run in continuous way. So account settings, yeah, you can explore them on your Zoom account. I guess the most useful part of this is this. So we went through every check mark that affects the current attacks, and we are suggesting here what to do with them, right? So Vlad, I don't know, you want to comment on this, but pretty much you say every item what can be configured, and is this something by default enabled or disabled, right?
It's mean if we want to something to restrict on the group level, we put as default. But if we put something enabled and locked, we propagate to the group level some inheritance in place here. So for them, join before host, it's like we restrict that for internal staff and for sales, but it should be for rooms. So it's locked by tire on the group level. So something like that. Using personal ID, it's not use personal meeting ID. It's recommended by Checkpoint and recommended by Zoom itself, because actually it's personal ID. It's a continuous meeting, and if you somewhere share this link, it's always will be in public. And also we know Checkpoint made some research in regards that personal meeting ID can be brute forced. So,
oh yeah, yeah. If you want to dive into the brute force research, I actually have a link in the back of it. So just to recap, so default means it's a default account behavior, right? And if you set it up on the account level, then it will be propagated to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And if you set up on group level, then yes, and on the account level, it will not be the same for same group. So if you need to differentiate, you can set it for group level. And if one user just set it in their account, it doesn't mean everybody in your company has this setting, right? So there's really things to watch there for.
And for example, on notification, user can join the meeting. It's enabled by default, but it's a recommended setting. For sales and marketing, it's not necessary to join meetings. People should be authenticated, because from all over the world, 80 people should join to our meetings and talk with our salespersons. But for internal staff, it will be locked on the group settings, because we all have accounts and all notificate user on our group for internal meetings.
So I guess I would publish this right after our call. But the question is like, what is the danger of each setting? So like joining before host, like if this is a business critical meeting, right, there should be a person who is the host, right, and they need to be first. Otherwise, you risk somebody else, you know, disrupting the meeting, changing the agenda, etc. So good example is a board meetings, right? If you have a company board meeting, one person should be responsible for hosting, right? The personal meeting ID is like, there was this some of the people were saying, oh, should just generate random ID every time and not use personal ID, and then you are safe, attacker will not join. Other people were saying, oh, maybe you should just use personal ID, like who is gonna guess how I named my personal room? Well, reality is it's actually quite easy to guess, because people usually name their rooms after their first name and last name, sometimes company name. And all of that has been brute forced, ages ago, to the password brute force and also password data leaks, because apparently a lot of people use their names and last names and company names as passwords, adding a couple symbols into it. It's very common. So yeah, just setting a personal meeting ID does not protect you. As far as the digital numbers IDs, so if you're using instant meetings, your number ID would be usually the same, and it still needs to be password protected. So The research about checkpoints that Vlad has mentioned, actually at the end of the guide, we have some links here. Yeah, this one that was actually published back in January. So, right, so when COVID was still not a pandemic, but it was already a disaster in several countries. Yeah, Checkpoint published research saying there are different numbers of digits in the meetings, but actually researchers at Checkpoint could predict the numbers. What does it mean by that? So if we go to this link, we'd actually just zoom in on Zoom to get some research. That's like some interesting words. So just to kind of quickly scan through that, what Checkpoint did, they analyzed the URL response to the meetings, and then they saw very interesting things. They created a script where you would just incrementally or randomly actually, yes, randomly into there. So it would crawl the Zoom possible digits, and the output would be invalid ID or the actual ID of the meeting. So this way they could find the scheduled meetings before they happen, right? And they could actually predict, right? But then Checkpoint reported it to Zoom, and based on what they're saying here, Zoom has responded positively, right? Also, the features, they said passwords are added by default to all future scheduled meetings. Now, this is not entirely true, because only if you have configured your account to require passwords for meetings, then they will be added. If you have not configured it on account level, but on the user level, then everybody else will be left out. So that's how it works. And then, yeah, adding passwords to scheduled meetings, that happened. Passwords are enforceable, yes, on account level and group level. That's where they need to be enforced. And they said Zoom will no longer indicate if meeting ID is valid or invalid. This is true. So today, if you try the script, you will not get this output. However, when you can just try it yourself. You can take any Zoom meeting ID and enter one number at the end. It will launch your Zoom app, but it will tell you with a little red text saying, oh, this meeting is not available, it's invalid. If you launch it too many times, it will lock you out from logging into Zoom. But the thing is, using some Selenium scripts and other techniques, you can actually still make a brute forcer to brute force Zoom IDs in real time. Will attackers use that? Well, that depends. I mean, if you have every person on Earth working in Zoom, that's a lucrative channel for attackers to try to, take their attacks to the next level, right? So I would say this is partially fixed, but Zoom responded, yeah, quite good to that. Going back to the settings over here. So yeah, the PM IDs we talked about, require passwords. So like pretty much everywhere you see the password is suggested, recommendation is try to use the password everywhere you can, right? Because if you use the passwords you cannot have random people connect to the Zoom call anymore. Simple as that. Is it hard to implement? No, you implement it on account level for everybody. And even when you start generating instant meeting IDs, the passwords are actually automatically added into it, right? I can actually try to maybe do and demonstrate it with my Google Calendar, just going to some date in future and select a day. And if I'm going to add a calendar over here, as you can see, more options. I would select add conference in Zoom meeting. And as you see, I have a plugin for the browser to generate it. And you see there is an ID has been generated. ID is unique. And there is a password over here. It's very small font. And if you do that, the password will be also automatically included in the calendar invite. And it can also be included in the link to Zoom. So it's literally no extraction required as long as you have set the password. So yeah, not as bad to have it out of the box, right, these days. But let's see if Zoom actually decides to do that. Yeah, embed passwords in meeting link, one-click join, right? That's a very recommended setting. Number 10 here. Chat is enabled on default. Again, if it's like a conference where people need to listen and talk and they need to send stuff, then chat is the way to save the URLs to extract those caches, right? That UNC vulnerabilities existed. So if you don't want bad stuff posted to chat, configure it in settings for your mass meetings and have it disabled, right? If you need chat functionality, have it enabled. Again, this is where it's good to have different settings and different group levels. File transfer, yeah. So do you use Zoom for file transfer? If not, why have it enabled, right? So that's another stuff. One was thing about actually protection versus detection. In Zoom, if you are looking in detection route, like getting the logs from Zoom to your SIEM or your log management solution, then logs do not arrive in real time. There's a delay, like with most of the SaaS systems, there's a delay in getting logs. And some of them are actually claimed to be logs, others are reports. Reports are now generated in real time. They take at least 24 hours to generate and then get ingested. So the time to detect would be more than 24 hours, and your time to respond will be more than your time to detect, right? So it's better to harden than to try to detect every attack. But if you cannot harden everything, you should also monitor. That's pretty much a rule of thumb. There are many other settings, like automated recording, IP address control, and so on. Vlad, do you want to stop on any of them, or should we just share this and continue with other
I think it's
things?
we can share like a practice which we are using in our company. It's actually no need to explain every possible option. It's fine,
Okay.
my opinion. But and we have a question in the chat.
Okay, sure. Okay. Do you want to voice the question, or should I just kind of? Oh, yeah, I see it.
Yeah. Love to everyone. Yep.
Okay. Recent incident. So the question is, what about recent incident with security problems, lack of encryption by default, and privacy problems like illegal data Facebook, and even about those users who are not registered there? Yeah. So I have some feedback on that, but that would be my personal opinion and not the company opinion. All right. Then I'd be happy to talk about it. So it feels like Zoom is not really proactive about security and privacy. And that observation I made by tracking what's been going on with the company for last year, right? So actually, to give you some feedback here. So last year, if you remember, there was an issue with the Zoom client on macOS where it would install a web server, right, by default. And it was actually mitigated by Apple. That was first time ever where Apple intruded into uninstalling some software by default, right? And yeah, this is how it looked like. So let me find this link. So yeah, here it is. So Jake Williams, he's a renowned researcher in cybersecurity. You perhaps know him from Twitter and so on. And when this happened in July, he said, yeah, he was using Zoom for years on Mac, and he's troubled by that because there was a remote code execution vulnerability because Zoom installer deployed a web server, right? So first response from Zoom was, if you remember, they said, oh, it's working as intended. It makes you a better experience. And they said, yeah, better experience with remote code execution vulnerability and a hidden web servers that we are not asked about. That kind of shows how company treats its clients, right? They think, they know better. Well, I have to agree with Jake here that indication was that no security development lifecycle was in place to manufacture the software, meaning it's maybe not intent that Zoom doesn't truly know what they're including with their software, which is a reality for many software manufacturers these days, right? These days, a lot of people, when they code a software, they just go to Stack Overflow, paste the code. If it worked great, they go to the next thing, right? And that bears a lot of risks. That's not a good practice. I mean, especially if you use a lot of free libraries who may be open source, maybe not. Even if they're open source, it doesn't mean that your developers have completely read the source code, right? So it bears a lot of additional questions. And in Zoom's case, yeah, there was a web server which was vulnerable. So as we are also a software developer, I think it's a good practice to do SDLC. I mean, we use several tools for that. We use Qualys for black box text, and we use Veracode for source code scanning. So a chance of RCE vulnerability being in software manufacture is very low, right? Because if we scan it black box and white box, and we use industry top tools for that, yeah, we probably are detecting and seeing everything that is there, right? But comparing SOC Prime to Zoom, I mean, we're a super small company, right? We're not public, so we're less regulated, and we're super tight because we're a security company. Zoom is a public company, so if they're doing their code scanning and they're seeing that and they're accepting that, then they will sooner or later face some compliance issues, right? Because yeah, you don't just accept kind of backdoors opening your product. You don't ship your vulnerable software. And Zoom was quick to react to that, right, to the macOS. So they removed the web server. Actually, Apple removed it, right? And Zoom then sent an update. But here we are, a bit more than half a year from that event. And as you can see today, Zoom had this vulnerability about, local privilege escalation to root access, right? So this is actually what hit the news earlier this week, right? Actually yesterday. So yeah, Patrick Wardle was actually the reporter who discovered this vulnerability. And in here, it actually explains a little bit what happened there. And the installer in Zoom was using some outdated way to interact with root, right? Pretty much creating a possibility to do a local privilege escalation, not remote one. But this just says, why is it functionalities even there in the current release, right? When Zoom as a company already saw that its security and privacy is important to its users. They saw it last year in July, at least, right? And then more researchers were warning it them last year, when everything was great, when economy was going up and their business was doing pretty good, right? But did they really learn from that, or are they saying they learned from that? So that's a question everyone can answer for themselves, but we see today that the macOS client is not that good. So this is what I actually got this morning. I only received on my Mac the update request after I joined yet another Zoom meeting without a password. And yeah, it just suggested me to deploy the version. By the way, it has 4.6, but after I updated, it started to say the version is 4.9. So again, something is off with the macOS installer. And yeah, having this software on the computer, that raises another question. So we have a company who is using, let's say, not fully transparent software development security practices, and their software is a massive web client server application that is now deployed on pretty much majority of humanity's computers, right? Because even if you are not in business, you're not using Zoom to conduct business, you would still use it as a client when you're connected to external webinar, right? You could join from browser, but as you know, it doesn't always work properly from browser. You may lose some functionality, the quality may be bad, or you may just refuse to load. That's what happens depending on which browser you run and what add-ons you have and so on. So it becomes a little bit tricky. But the thing is, yeah, everybody's using it. It's not exactly secure. Is company fixing stuff? Yes. Is every software company patching stuff? Yes, right? And then to me personally, because if you can see by my first name, I'm originally from Eastern Europe, actually from Ukraine. And we already saw what happens when everybody runs the software that does not have secure development life cycles. So MIDOC, yes, probably everybody heard about NotPetya attack, which encrypted like 90% of enterprises in the country. That was the same supply chain vector. Everybody was running MIDOC. They didn't have to, but they were running to submit tax reports. So like, while officially you're not enforced to do it, everybody was doing it, right? And when it was used to actually, yeah, ship the software update with the ransomware, which is also triggered remotely and fully autonomous, that leads to disastrous consequences, not only to Ukraine, but also to all the companies who had VPN-linked networks with it, right? A lot of big companies. So this is a risk vector, but now instead of one country, you have potentially a vector for entire world, right? So that's worrying. I guess that's why we saw SpaceX or NASA react to it really quick and say, oh, we don't want it, it's off our computers, right? And yeah, so that's actually, you know, my personal take on it. So I think it's a risk. It's not consistent in what Zoom is saying and what they're doing, right? So to harden it, I guess my best suggestion would be, if you need to use it day-to-day as a business, have some virtual machine or VDI and run it there, right? Don't keep it running on your raw hardware, because you don't want like NotPetya scenario. If there's like one chance in a billion it will repeat, you don't want to take the chance, right? The consequences are simply not worth it. Okay, I see another question. So yeah, actually a comment about transferring confidential data to third parties. Well, if they use the library of Facebook, like many do, then they are transferring the data, right? That's technically how it works. So unless they open up the source code and say the library is removed, you have a question if it really works. One interesting thing there, so not related to Zoom, is that on mobile apps, for example, you would be surprised if you dig into every mobile app and see how many apps they're using from Facebook and many big companies. If you deploy some solution to monitor your web requests, like some kind of proxy server, there's actually a solution, I think it's called SSL proxy, which you can use, an open source one. It will tell you where the connections are made. And one of my friends has interested sort of incident at home where they were using an app called like for mapping Wi-Fi networks, where people are exchanging public Wi-Fi information. And he suddenly saw that there is connections going to Facebook suddenly from one of the phones in a big volume, while that phone did not have any Facebook apps on it. So yeah, that app was one of those Wi-Fi sharing apps, and it was using Facebook libraries. So the software developer itself did not check what library does. They included it, it works, right? And then the data is sent there. So that could be a reason, right? It could be not a conspiracy, it could be just that, yeah, they use the library that is working good as they know from some other project. So yeah, it's a little bit of a mess that we live in the software world. So unless it's like a cybersecurity product with certain certifications, you can expect there can be some, slip ups and, trust but verify, but like these days we say verify and then trust. So yeah, that's as far as Zoom goes. Is there some any questions on that? We'll be free, keen to follow up after webinar or share a guide. Other stuff I wanted to talk about is also what is happening, in the world today with all the attacks. So the COVID-related phishing, probably let's talk a little bit about that. So again, there's an article on our blog which kind of covers every detail of that. So saying that, yeah, there was actually research saying that people started to register domains with COVID-19 in their name since like January. And while in January there was like 100,000 domains registered, in March there was 500,000. So literally people are abusing this, crisis we live in to send out phishing campaigns. But if you look into the specific malware that's been used and website techniques, then they're not that different from what we've seen before. There was not really a 0-day or like special vulnerability or RCE has been used there. And if you look into how phishing is done, if you can use MITRE ATT&CK for analyzing it, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if there's somebody on the call not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, please post it in chat and I can do a little dive on it. Otherwise, I would assume that people know it a little bit. So yeah, if you look into tactics, techniques, and procedures by phishing campaigns, you can actually, there are not so many combinations, right? Unless you send phishing through Zoom, which has been not attempted yet. So yeah, you're delivering the malware, either through the link or to attachment, or yeah, you can deliver also other types of like more specific things. And usual fraud and scams could be like fake invoices, fake purchase orders, charity, password resets, recommendations, and so on. And you would think that in 2020, people has beaten this phishing and spam problem, but the reality is that it's actually making it through most of the security systems, even though the efficiency rates of the spam protection is super high, right? It's like, yeah, it can be more than 99%, but still it only takes you one email to slip through and it can have consequences, right? So yeah, with COVID, here's an example of specifically what it was using. So yeah, they would say that this is additional information about COVID campaign, or some scare emails about people getting sick, or government not being able to mitigate, or somebody like more cheaper, like we should be, oh, we have a cure, like you get a vaccine, you have like super cure from everything in the world and COVID as well, right? So all those things that people sometimes fall for, if they don't have like critical thinking or are not trained to respond to phishing. And yeah, it's like, it's quite easy to make mistakes these days because everybody is stressed. Everybody's, reading the information to stay up to date, to understand what's happening. But if you really like dig into it, you can narrow down the phishing campaign to actual techniques that are being used, right? So we cannot expect to have the list of all the possible phishing websites and domains that have been registered for the COVID-19, because 500,000, I mean, tracking that alone is a lot of work for threat intelligence vendors, but making use of it in an enterprise, it's quite a challenge. And if you're not an enterprise but a smaller business, then you probably don't have a threat intelligence platform to begin with. So it's more common to actually look at how it's done and see what we can do with the tools we have in place today, right? So if we can just warn our users to be extra careful about the attachments that are coming, that they do not expect, coming with the COVID, like don't open it, send it over to our info security unit. If we have a SIEM system in place or log management, we could create some hunting queries and rules to actually respond to the techniques, right? So not saying, oh, this IP address is bad, and since email came from it, it's phishing, but saying, okay, if this contains a PDF and it is actually, that PDF is spawning for us some critical Windows processes or launching a PowerShell, then it's probably not behavior working as usual. So yeah, so it's actually quite a big description here in this article. Again, link will be sent to you so you can deep dive into it in your time. And there's also some description how you detect it. So if you are on the SOC and SIEM type of things, there are some Sigma rules which describe it. And some of them actually are paid, but half of them is free. And also they are free for every healthcare organization in the world. That's a little piece we did to just kind of respond to that. So yeah, that's as far as COVID phishing goes. And again, Zoom was used as a reason for phishing just last week. So yeah, attackers are really working day and night these days and catching up fast. Another vector I want to talk about is about DNS. So again, if you follow all the Twitter posts, you've probably seen some stuff going about DNS. So since everybody went to work from home, and home to connect to internet, people have routers, right? And those routers would most of the time not be industrial grade, right? So unless you, as a security person, have bought yourself like a Cisco or Checkpoint or any kind of secure routing equipment and put it at home, you'd be probably using some consumer grade routers, right? In this example of Draytech, which was hacked using a remote vulnerability, and there's like a whole stream of news going over it. And yeah, people are actually listing the names like of what being used to attack the routers or hacked routers. And the IP, what they were doing after they would be attacking the routers, they would replace the DNS server IP address with the one of the, of the one controlled by attackers. Why would they do that? Well, mainly to do DNS cache poisoning and redirect all your requests where the attackers needs you, right? So you're going to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or your favorite security site, and instead you're getting to the site that the attacker intended you to go for, right? And that's opened up tons of vectors for attacks, right? They can take you anywhere they want, right? So for majority of home users, this is like too hard, right? Because like their router is just working. Maybe they have a strong password in place. Maybe it's WPA2. Maybe they have a radio server, but if they did not update the router in last 3 months, is a chance, or maybe half a year, the chances that it is vulnerable, right? So it's kind of a good advice to ask like any users that work for a corporation to update the routers to the latest firmware. I personally myself was, again, I hit this problem a bit personally because I'm updating my router often, but there was actually a DOS vulnerability in the router vendor that I use. And I noticed that people started port scanning me like every day. Maybe like my IP got visible somewhere. And router became DOS because of the port scan. So I refreshed it to the latest firmware, reset up all the network, and now it's not freezing anymore. At least today's webinar is running without any disruption, so that's great. But yeah, if you wanna like, if you cannot really secure all your users' routers, but the least you can do is to recommend, and then you could perhaps give them another way to kind of use corporate services to secure the internet, right? So that goes into using VPNs and kind of proxies. Again, a lot of people now using tools like Zscaler, for example. So anything that is cloud native, proxying server, which is also has a VPN in it, it's kind of recommended to have those agents deployed on customers, on end users' homes, so they can connect to a centralized cloud. So at least as enterprise or business, you can monitor their web activities and you can proactively block access to malicious sites there. Where the attack can begin is that if they hack the router, they change the DNS, and then yeah, it's like you're running an agent and then everything's secure. But as soon as you disconnect your corporate VPN, it goes to the DNS that's listed in its browser, in its router, and everything is routed to malicious DNS. So again, this may be an advice for a bit of a tech-savvy users. What I did is that I looked what is being possible to kind of protect the DNS, and there is a project that we also mentioned called Pi-hole. It's it's pretty much black hole in internet on your Raspberry Pi, right? That's an open source project. It's not commercial. They only connect and donate. So yeah, it's very, very nice. So you can use it, deploy it yourself. You can get all the source code. You can get it on Docker on virtual machine and deploy on the Raspberry Pi. What it does, it actually routes your DNS traffic to the Pi-hole instance, which can then support block list and remove any kind of suspicious traffic from it. So I actually set up one at home. This is the one that you can see now on the screen. And I set up last weekend, just kind of as an experiment. So by default, the Pi-hole's intention is to block the ads traffic, right? So you're getting really pesky ads. They will block the requests to the domains which are propagating ads. And here you can see some statistics from my home. I don't think it's confidential. So like I have some update requests. You also see stuff like, Graph on Instagram. So like Instagram is working if you blacklist that domain, it's working fine, right? There's also some additional ads and analytics, like tons of stuff is being collected. They have quite a few devices actually going there. So yeah, 19% of requests I have now are now blocked. And yeah, this is the block list. So 19.3 are blocked at DNS level, and then you have 22% which are cached, right? So you pretty much reduce your DNS workload by considerable time. The best part is this project is free and it is an open source, right? I did only 2 changes to the stock installation. The main one is actually you can inject your own lists into it. And if you go to settings, you go to block list. If you have any open source threading intel feeds, you can actually inject them here. And then you can not only be blocking ads, but also blocking malicious URLs by DNS name. And that's example of what I injected here. We generated roughly 1.3 million blacklisted domains. Second thing, what you can do, you can have Pi-hole as you can have first layer DNS, which filters out the ads and malicious stuff. But as a second layer, you could use some commercial DNS firewall, right? So something like Cisco OpenDNS or Quad9 from Cloudflare, which is Quad ones, right? So yeah, that's kind of you're making a cascade DNS server, and you're first filtering out the publicly known bad stuff, and then have the commercial solution on top filter out the non-publicly known stuff, which really clears out a lot of traffic. And again, when you are clicking on a phishing link, you are going to a domain, right? If that domain is on the blacklist, it will prevent you from getting to the phishing page, right? So that's another thing that can be used in terms of the actual Pi-hole hardware. It can be installed on the Raspberry Pi. So I gave my Pi-hole about 4 gigs of RAM. It constantly uses between 25 to 30%. So it can actually work on 1 to 2 gigs of RAM, right? And that services on average apartment network where several people live and have a lot of home internet connected devices, phones and stuff like that. So again, a little bit of free open source solution. And like if your business colleagues are tech friendly, that's really easy to set up. If you have a system administrator who can set it up for other people, it's also quite straightforward. Like literal installation is step by step. If you ever need any DNS server deployment, it will be super easy for you. Yeah, so that's another little piece that helps. Other than that, yeah, we've seen some other attacks. So literally, usually the best source of latest exploits, like if you talk about open source intelligence, and Twitter is the best source. So literally, if you like search for exploits, right, and let's say you put Microsoft Teams, which is another collaboration software, you can see, yeah, there was a full RC exploit, but that was like back in the day, right? So you always need to look at the latest stuff and see if there was something fresh. So yeah, people are also looking to exploit Teams, right? They don't have as many problems as in Zoom, but you still kind of knows that any software that becomes most popular, it will also become a target. So we need to stay sharp and keep our eyes open and respond to that. So that's another thing, that staying up with this threat landscape is now an important task for everybody who's in IT and in security. Yeah, so that was pretty much it on my end. Happy to answer any questions, any comments, anything else. If people want to discuss something, if you have some questions, any challenges in security you have, happy to answer. Also, we have Vlad here on the call with us, so he'll be happy to comment as well. All right, if there are no questions, then I guess we will wrap up. We will share the recording of this webinar if you want to review it for future purposes. We'll also send the links to the guides and advisory on the blog. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for great questions, and be safe during these times. It's very important. And yeah, stay secure in cyber domain as well. There are a lot of tools there, actually, and practices that can be used to do that. Thank you.